June 10th, 1944. Afternoon. A quiet French village sits under a warm summer sun, unaware that within hours its name will be carved into the darkest pages of human history. Children play in the dusty streets, women hang laundry between stone houses, and old men sit outside the cafe discussing rumours of Allied landings in Normandy, still unsure what the news means for their tiny community. The church bells ring at 2 p.m, ordinary, peaceful, familiar. But by 2:45, German vehicles can already be heard approaching from the southern road, engines growling like an omen. People step onto porches to look, expecting a routine patrol, nothing unusual. They see soldiers wearing black uniforms, spotless boots, weapons organised with precise discipline, Waffen-SS troops, men who rarely enter small villages unless something terrible is about to happen. But the villagers don't know that yet. They don't know these soldiers have arrived with orders that will shatter everything they love. They don't know that by sunset their homes will be burning, their families gone, their lives wiped out in an act so violent and sudden that even decades later, historians will struggle to understand how it happened so fast. For now, all they know is that the Germans are here again, but something feels different. The troops aren't stopping to question anyone, aren't searching bags, aren't asking for documents. They are doing something far more chilling. They are spreading out without speaking, forming a perimeter, closing off every exit from the village. And as the last road is sealed, a simple truth becomes unavoidable. No one is leaving. No one. A young boy named Alain sees one soldier check his watch before signalling silently to another. This small gesture, innocent on the surface, is the moment everything changes. Because this time, the Germans aren't here to patrol. They are here to punish, to erase, to make an example, to silence a town suspected of helping the French resistance after D-Day. And in the command report that would be written later, one cold phrase would explain the entire argument: collective reprisal. The villagers don't know that. They don't understand why German soldiers are herding men into the village square, why women and children are being directed not violently, but firmly toward the church, why everywhere they look armoured vehicles block the streets like iron curtains. There is no chaos, no shouting, no gunfire. The silence is worse. Much worse. Silence means planning. Silence means this is not spontaneous rage or battlefield confusion. Silence means someone has given orders ahead of time, orders designed to break human beings without warning. Around 3:20 p.m, the last of the men are gathered into 5 different barns across the village. Some try to ask questions: what is happening? Where are you taking us? When can we return home? But the only response they receive is a hand gesture telling them to stand still. Women murmuring prayers inside the church, hear the doors close behind them. Children whisper to their mothers, frightened not by violence but by the unnatural stillness. Even the birds outside seem to sense something is wrong. They stop singing, as if nature itself is holding its breath. At 3:45 p.m, one German officer steps into the doorway of a barn, looks at the men inside and says nothing. His face reveals nothing. His posture reveals nothing. He simply steps back out, and the villagers hear him walking away. Then, without warning, gunfire erupts. Not the wild, panicked kind of gunfire, but precise, measured bursts, controlled patterns meant for one purpose. Rows of armed soldiers fire into the barns, not aiming high, not aiming randomly, but deliberately toward the legs of the trapped men. Because this is not meant to be quick. This is meant to be methodical. Outside, smoke begins to rise from the roof of another barn. Inside the church, women begin screaming when they smell burning wood and hear children crying. No one knows what is happening exactly, but they know it is happening everywhere at once. The entire village is under attack not by bombs or artillery, but by men who came prepared to erase it. And as the minutes pass, the Germans move with terrifying efficiency, lighting buildings, destroying documents, dragging furniture into piles to ignite, smashing radios, breaking windows, blocking doors so no one can escape. This is not a moment of madness. It is a coordinated act of destruction carried out with military discipline. At 4:10 p.m, flames rise high enough that German officers begin shouting orders to accelerate the procedure. Villagers hiding behind walls or inside cellars can hear soldiers laughing, not with joy, but with confidence, because they know no one is coming to stop them. Allied troops are too far away. Resistance fighters have melted into forests, and the German unit burning this village, the 2nd SS Panzer Division Das Reich, is infamous for leaving no survivors, no evidence, no recourse. But the greatest horror of all is not the destruction. It is the calmness with which it is done. People often expect evil to arrive with screaming, shouting, fury, or chaos. But in this village, on this day, evil comes as a routine operation. By 5 p.m., the flames have consumed most of the buildings. The barns are burning from both ends. The church, too, has fire spreading around its wooden interior. Women inside try to break the windows, but German soldiers shoot at the openings, forcing them back into the smoke. Men trapped in barns attempt to climb walls or hide beneath bodies, but the structure collapses around them. Everywhere, the heat becomes unbearable, and yet the strangest thought enters the minds of those still alive. Why? Why destroy a peaceful village miles away from the front lines? Why punish innocent people who have done nothing except live under occupation? The truth will only emerge later. A German officer suspected the village of helping partisans. No proof, no names, no arrests, just suspicion. And suspicion was enough to condemn hundreds. But even after the destruction is nearly complete, the most chilling part has yet to begin the cover-up. Because the soldiers responsible do not want this atrocity traced back to them. They want the world to believe the village was caught in a battle, a crossfire, a tragic accident of war. So they begin arranging bodies in ways that suggest resistance gunfire. They drag weapons into burned houses. They scatter shell casings from Allied weapons kept for moments exactly like this. They write fabricated reports. They instruct the few surviving witnesses, mostly children hiding under debris, to say the attack came from partisan fire, but lies cannot bury truth forever. Not when an entire village has vanished in a single afternoon. Not when the bodies number in the hundreds. Not when every surviving child grows up remembering what they saw, what they smelled, what they heard. Not when Allied liberators arrive months later and walk through streets where only stone foundations remain. And not when the world learns the name of the village Oradour-sur-Glane, a name forever linked with one of the most horrifying massacres of World War II. But at this point in the story, the world does not know. The village does not know. The German soldiers do not care. They believe they have succeeded. They believe they have wiped out a community and buried the evidence. They believe no one will ever know what happened. But history has a way of preserving truth, especially when the truth is soaked into the ruined walls of a village that once lived in peace. And as night falls, the Germans withdraw, leaving behind smouldering ruins, ashes, silence, and the ghosts of hundreds. A place where the air still tastes like smoke, where the ground burns for hours, where no one speaks because there is no one left to speak. But a handful of survivors' children who escaped by miracle, men who crawled through smoke, women who slipped beneath collapsed debris will soon make their way into the forest, and when they do, they will tell the world what happened, they will expose the truth the soldiers tried to hide, and their voices will become the reason this village, though destroyed, will never be forgotten again. June 11th, 1944. Dawn. Smoke still rises from the ruins of Oradour-sur-Glane, drifting in pale grey columns that stretch over the hills like warnings to anyone approaching. The village is silent, so silent in fact that French farmers walking from neighbouring hamlets think the morning fog has simply settled strangely over the rooftops. But as they come closer, they begin to smell the unmistakable scent of burnt wood mixed with something colder, heavier, a smell they cannot place at first. Then they see the collapsed church, the blackened schoolhouse, the barns burned into skeletal frames, and the terrifying realization comes. This village hasn't suffered a fire. It has suffered an event. Something orchestrated. Something absolute. And then the first survivor emerges from the trees. A boy no older than 8, covered in soot, his face streaked with tears he doesn't even remember shedding. When the farmers reach him, he cannot speak. He simply points toward the ruins as if pointing at something too large for words. When he finally whispers, "They burned everyone," the men around him fall silent. They understand instantly that this is not tragedy. It is atrocity. And they also know something else. The Germans will not want anyone talking about it. So the farmers carry the boy into the woods, away from the road, away from German patrols, away from the site of the still glowing ruins. They find 3 more survivors that morning, 2 men who crawled through broken walls of a barn after soldiers left, and 1 woman who escaped through a church window while smoke blinded the guards outside. Each tells fragments of the same story, fragments that together form a nightmare so complete that the listeners struggle to believe human beings could plan it so calmly. But belief comes easily when the evidence is visible from miles away. By noon, word begins spreading across the countryside. People whisper the same sentence in disbelief. They destroyed Oradour, not fought it, not punished it, not occupied it, destroyed it, completely. And yet, the deeper horror begins now not in the destruction, but in the Germans' urgent attempt to erase their crime before the truth reaches Allied ears. The 2nd SS Panzer Division, Das Reich, does not retreat quietly. They station officers on surrounding roads, stopping travellers, threatening them, ordering them to stay silent. They warn that any French civilians found spreading lies will be punished. They patrol the outskirts of the village looking for witnesses who might still be alive. They burn remaining structures that night just to ensure nothing incriminating remains unscorched. Their commanders file reports claiming that the village harboured partisans and that resistance fighters opened fire first. They insist women and children died in accidental explosions. They write statements so calculated, so rehearsed, that even their own soldiers understand the purpose, erase guilt before guilt is traced to them. But truth is stubborn, and survivors do not forget. One of them, a 47-year-old mechanic named Louis, begins walking north toward Limoges immediately after sunrise. His clothes are torn, his hands are burned, and he is shaking constantly, but he refuses to stop. His wife and children were locked in the church. He heard the screams until smoke drowned all sound. He cannot undo what happened, but he can ensure the world hears every detail, every name, every order, every German responsible. When he reaches Limoges, French resistance contacts bring him into a cellar beneath a bakery. There, trembling, dehydrated, almost delirious, he recounts everything he witnessed: the soldiers gathering men into barns, the officers supervising calmly, the silence before the shots, the way the flames climbed the church walls. The resistance commander listening to him writes furiously, filling page after page with testimony. When he finishes, the man says one sentence that will define the next months of French underground action: "This will never be forgotten." But to ensure it is not forgotten, they must act fast. German forces are still combing the region. Patrols roam the roads. Survivors move through forest like shadows, hiding under roots and branches. The resistance realizes they must collect as many witnesses as possible before the SS returns to silence anyone still alive. That evening, they send couriers, teenagers on bicycles, old men walking side paths, women with baskets that hide messages beneath bread loaves to every safe house in the region. The message is always the same: find the survivors before the Germans do. Meanwhile, in Oradour, the Germans move with terrifying efficiency, using shovels, axes, and boots to move debris, break locks, rearrange evidence, and destroy anything that might reveal intent. They issue strict orders forbidding locals from entering the ruins. They march dogs around the area. They burn personal items, photographs, diaries, school books, clothing objects that might help identify victims. They hope the world will see the ruins and assume chaos, battle, accidental fire. But their biggest mistake is underestimating France's memory, because the survivors, once safe, repeat the same story with such consistency that even those unfamiliar with the village believe them instantly. In the forests, meetings begin. Resistance groups, FTP, AS, Maquis fighters gather around maps and lanterns, discussing how to get word to the Allied commanders more than 300 kilometers away. The journey will require crossing railways guarded by German snipers and mine-laced farmland. But they are determined. The world must know what was done to Oradour-sur-Glane, and what Germany plans to do to other villages if no one intervenes. That night, two men set out on bicycles carrying the first written testimony copies. The Germans have no idea they are coming. They assume fear will keep the region silent, but fear breaks when tragedy outweighs danger. Meanwhile, SS officers hold their own meeting in a commandeered manner. They sit around a long table poring over their forged reports. One officer insists they cannot blame partisans too directly. Too much evidence will point to the opposite. Another argues they must frame the massacre as an anti-terrorist operation. A third says they need to spread rumours suggesting the villagers were hiding Allied weapons. Their conversation lasts hours. Their guilt, however, lasts far longer. As the officers plan their narrative, they do not realise something crucial. One of their own soldiers, an Alsatian forcibly conscripted into the SS, is listening quietly, memorising every detail, every lie. One day, he will testify in court, and when he does, history will gain the missing pieces the Germans tried to bury. But that day is still far away. For now, the fight for truth begins with frightened civilians hiding in woods, whispering to each other that the village they loved is gone. Only ruins remain, only ashes, only the smell of smoke drifting through what was once a peaceful valley. And yet, as night deepens, a strange and powerful determination begins to form among them. They cannot bring back their families. They cannot rebuild the houses whose foundations still glow red. But they can do something just as important: ensure the world knows exactly what happened and who did it. Survivors walk from farm to farm, speaking as calmly as their voices allow, describing how men were gathered into barns, how women and children were locked in the church, how fire consumed everything. Some listeners cry, some go pale, others clench their fists until knuckles turn white. But no one doubts the story. No one thinks these people are exaggerating. The horror is written across their faces, in their voices, in the soot that still stains their skin. And this is when something remarkable occurs. Strangers open their homes to the survivors, offering food, water, blankets, whatever little they have. Farmers who barely have enough bread for their own children share it without hesitation. Families welcome women they have never met, holding their hands through the night. Everyone understands, if the Germans destroyed one village without reason, they could destroy another tomorrow. Everyone feels the same fear, everyone feels the same anger. But above all, they feel the same responsibility. This story must spread. By morning, French resistance leaders have a plan. They will send runners through the forest toward Clermont-Ferrand, where Allied intelligence might receive messages. They will send coded transmissions over illegal radios, using encrypted phrases that risk detection by German signal intercept teams. They will document every name, every house, every testimony, and they will create the first outline of what will later be known as one of the worst civilian massacres in Western Europe. But as these plans unfold, the Germans are making plans of their own not for truth, but for escape. Within days, Das Reich receives orders to continue north toward Normandy to slow the Allied advance. This is the moment the officers breathe relief. With movement orders, they believe the massacre will be forgotten in the chaos of war. They believe time will bury their crime, but they are wrong. Because even as they leave the region, the suffering they caused becomes the spark that ignites a wave of resistance across southwestern France. Villagers who once stayed quiet to survive now swear to fight. Couriers accelerate operations. Radio operators push their luck with longer broadcasts. And everywhere the Germans pass, French civilians glare silently, knowing exactly what these troops did in Oradour. Meanwhile, survivors begin returning cautiously to the edge of their destroyed village, escorted by resistance fighters. They walk through the ruins in silence, stepping carefully on scorched earth still warm in places. They stop at the remains of the church walls blackened, roof collapsed, ground covered in ash. They stand before what used to be houses, now nothing more than charred doorframes and melted metal. They kneel, some praying, some collapsing from grief, some staring wordlessly as if their minds refuse to accept the devastation. But the most haunting moment comes when one woman, whose entire family perished inside the church, presses her hand against the blackened stone wall. She whispers, "They thought they could hide this." And she is right. The Germans believed they could erase Oradour-sur-Glane in one afternoon. But they forgot the most important truth of all. Ruins speak. Survivors speak. History speaks. And no amount of lies can silence a crime of this magnitude. As the sun falls behind the hills once again, the survivors know the truth cannot stay hidden. They know the world must hear what happened, and they know the story of Oradour is only beginning because justice, though slow, is coming. And justice will demand every detail, every testimony, every truth the Germans tried so hard to bury beneath ashes and silence. September the 12th, 1944. 3 months after Oradour-sur-Glane was destroyed, Allied troops finally enter the region. American soldiers riding in open jeeps slow down as they approach the outskirts of the village, expecting to see another small French community returning to life after liberation. But instead, they see something else, an entire village reduced to ashes, homes collapsed into charred ribs, a church gutted by fire, streets coated in a fine layer of grey dust that lifts into the air with every step. The soldiers walk quietly, unsure where to begin or what they are even looking at. One lieutenant whispers to another, "There's nothing left." And he's right. Nothing but ruin, nothing but silence, nothing but the undeniable evidence of what happened here on June 10th. Minutes later, a French resistance guide arrives with the few surviving villagers. These survivors, still haunted by what they saw, begin telling the Americans the story, pointing to the barns, to the square, to the church, all places where hundreds died in a matter of hours. One American sergeant, hardened by months of combat, removes his helmet and stands motionless for a long time, his face stunned. He has seen battlefields before, he has seen towns shelled by artillery, he has seen casualties, but he has never seen a place where every building was burned deliberately, where the pattern of destruction reveals not warfare, but intention. "This wasn't fighting," he mutters. "This was punishment." Word travels up the chain of command fast. By nightfall, reports have reached Allied intelligence officers who begin interviewing survivors formally. They record names, ages, details, times, descriptions of soldiers, the sequence of events, the sound of voices, the smell of smoke, the location of bodies. These accounts travel further still to London, where analysts immediately recognise the name Das Reich, and to Washington, where photographs of the ruins stun officials into silence. Yet as the Allies document the truth, the German soldiers responsible keep marching across France, believing foolishly that war will erase their actions. But war does not erase, war exposes. In December, several captured SS soldiers from Das Reich are interrogated by Allied forces. Most deny involvement, some refuse to speak, others claim they were simply following orders and saw nothing themselves. But one soldier, an Alsatian conscript forced into the SS breaks. He describes the planning meeting, the orders, the calmness of the officers, the rehearsed cover story. He admits he never imagined the world would find out. His confession becomes the first crack in the wall the Germans tried to build around their crime. Meanwhile, in liberated France, the survivors return again and again to the ruins of Oradour-sur-Glane, not because they expect to find anything left, but because this is all they have. The village is no longer a home, it is a graveyard, a memory, a wound carved into the earth. Mothers stand at the ruins of the church, tracing fingertips along charred stone as if trying to feel the presence of children they lost. Men stand in front of burned barns, placing their palms on collapsed beams, remembering the friends, brothers, fathers who died inside. Some survivors bring flowers, others bring photographs. A few kneel, sobbing quietly, overwhelmed by the simple fact that they lived when so many others did not. Local officials debate whether to rebuild the village on top of the ruins, but the survivors refuse. They demand the ruins stay exactly as they are. Not one stone moved, not one wall repaired, not one skeleton of a home touched. They want Oradour to stand forever in silence, a scar that will remind future generations of what hatred and occupation truly mean. And so the French government agrees. Oradour-sur-Glane will not be rebuilt. It will remain as it was found on the day of liberation, a village frozen in time, preserved as a memorial, a museum, a warning. Visitors come from across France to walk through the remains. They see rusted sewing machines still sitting where they were left, bicycles melted against stone walls, pots and pans warped by fire still resting on burned stovetops, charred bed frames, broken toys, the everyday objects of an ordinary life interrupted by extraordinary cruelty. Many visitors leave in tears, others in silence, some whisper prayers, all feel the weight of what happened. But preserving the memory is only one part of justice. The other part must happen in court. And so, after the war ends, France begins preparing one of the most complicated trials in its history, a trial not only of SS officers, but of the very idea of following orders blindly. The trial begins in 1953, nearly 9 years after the massacre. Survivors sit in the courtroom, faces pale, hands trembling, listening as the accused try to distance themselves from the events. Some claim they were not present. Some say they were simply obeying commands. Others insist they were forced into service. The courtroom fills with journalists, officials, and citizens of France. People want answers. They want accountability. They want to know how human beings could do something like this. One officer, confronted with survivor testimony, breaks down and admits the truth. We wanted to make an example. We wanted the region to fear us. His admission echoes across the room like a thunderclap. But the trial becomes even more complex when several accused soldiers, Alsatians conscripted by Germany, testify that they never wanted to be part of the SS and had no power to refuse orders. The courtroom erupts in arguments, tears, political debate, and moral questioning. France itself is divided. Some call for harsh punishment. Others argue these conscripts were victims as well. In the end, some are convicted, some are sentenced, some are released, and some vanish into history without ever facing a judge. The officer directly responsible for the orders, Major Heinz Lammerding, escapes trial entirely, shielded by post-war politics in West Germany. He dies decades later, never having answered for Oradour. His escape from justice becomes a wound almost as deep as the massacre itself. But justice is not entirely absent. Survivors continue speaking about the village, giving interviews, writing memoirs, telling schoolchildren what happened. They ensure no one can claim ignorance. Their voices become the lasting verdict, the final judgment against those who tried to hide their crime, and as years pass, Oradour-sur-Glane becomes more than a place. It becomes a symbol of what happens when hatred is given authority, a symbol of what ordinary people suffer under tyranny, a symbol of the truth that even the smallest village, the quietest community, can be dragged into the storm of war without warning. In 1999, French President Jacques Chirac visits the ruins and declares, "Here, France saw the face of barbarity." In 2013, German President Joachim Gauck walks the same streets with the last surviving witness, a man who was a teenager during the massacre. Gauck bows his head and says words no German leader before him ever said publicly, "I ask for forgiveness," and the survivor, standing among the ruins that once held his entire world, listens in silence. He cannot undo the past, he cannot bring back the dead, but he knows that remembering is its own act of resistance, and Oradour-sur-Glane remains exactly as it was in 1944. Rusted cars still sit in driveways, sewing machines still rest on scorched tables, the school still stands in ruin, the church still bears burn marks as dark as the day they were made. Grass grows between cobblestones, wind rolls through empty windows, birds sometimes land on cracked roofs, the only living voices in a place that death once claimed completely. Every visitor who walks through its streets feels the same chill, the sense that time stopped here because something happened that time itself refuses to bury. And that is why the Germans failed in their attempt to hide what they did. They underestimated the power of memory. They underestimated the strength of survivors. They underestimated history's refusal to forget. Oradour-sur-Glane stands today not because France preserved it, but because the world needs to see what hatred produces. Because a nation cannot heal by erasing wounds. Because silence would only repeat the crime. And because every ruined doorway, every melted bicycle, every scorched stone whispers the same warning to every person who enters: this is what happens when evil is allowed to act without conscience. The Germans tried to hide Oradour-sur-Glane in one afternoon, but the survivors revealed it to the world. The ruins made it immortal, and history ensured that what happened here will never be hidden again, never denied, never erased, never forgotten. Oradour remains a village without voices, yet louder than any spoken testimony, a place where silence itself tells the story. A reminder that even when an entire community is destroyed, the truth survives, and that truth now belongs to the world.